the information that he's been asked. We'll now move on to Mr. MacGregor. Welcome to our committee, sir. You have 7 minutes.
Appreciate it, Chair. Thank you very much. Minister, thank you for appearing today. I want to go on to the subject of Vote 40, and I want to recognize the work of Mr. Blakey in highlighting this issue during the main estimates. Now, we have before us, Parliament did authorize $7 billion, but we can see it's about $2.7 billion that have been spent, leaving $4.3 billion unspent. So one of the chief reasons that we heard from your government for this Vote 40 was that you wanted to have to authorize the spending so it could be used as soon as possible once the plans were ready and a Treasury Board submission was complete. We see the supplementary estimates are you're not even close to allocating all the money. So could not these items that have been allocated since the main estimates, couldn't they have come under the supplementary estimates so that, through the Treasury Board submission process, so that we parliamentarians could have had better oversight and better informed authorization of where the money is actually going?
Sure. Thank you very much for your question, Mr. MacGregor. We've actually, so far, $2.9 billion have been allocated. That's 45% of the amount of the total Vote 40. Brian has informed me, which is on track. If you look at where we are in the fiscal year, that is, we are on track in terms of that. Further, the detail on this, if you can go to the website sources and uses of the budget implementation vote by department and see this information. The granularity of this is very significant. For instance, combating aggressive international tax avoidance, budget funding was $4,885,000 allocated so far, $3,966,360. You can take a look at protecting air travelers. You can see that the $240,612,000 has been fully allocated. Strengthening Canada's food safety, $15,700,000 allocated. Or rather, in the budget funding, so far, $12,700,000. So the level of granularity and transparency on this is
what the crux of my question was that in order to give better parliamentary oversight, given that there's still so much money that's left unspent, could not these have come through supplementary estimates to give us as a parliamentary body the chance to have that better oversight rather than approving a $7 billion fund for your department to spend as necessary? It seems to me they could have been introduced right here and now for us to actually have a look at the needs of each department and then to approve them on each line item.
A couple of things on this. One is that the fact that we're updating on a monthly basis this information, and so it's being updated in real time, accessible to parliamentarians. With this level of granularity, and I'll just give you the example in terms of CRA. Funding will be used to increase capacity to enhance GST and HST compliance activities and to address tax obligations of non-residents on rental income in Canada. Up to 170 full-time equivalents are planned to be renewed or hired over the next 5 years. These initiatives are expected to generate roughly $70 million in federal revenue each year. That's the level of granularity for one. I'm using that as an example, and I can provide you with that. I may ask Brian also to speak to this as somebody who has been extremely involved and played a leadership role in this. But in terms of actual parliamentarians having the opportunity to follow government spending and the results of that government spending, this is unprecedented. And Brian, would you like to?
Well, thank you, Minister, and thank you, Mr. MacGregor. As the Minister notes, the intention of Vote 40 was to provide more and better information to parliamentarians so that they understood how the budget was being implemented. We had a budget delivered by the Department of Finance at the end of February, and the main estimates, delivered April 16th, were the first opportunity to present budget requirements to Parliament. And we did that in the form of Vote 40 with the detailed annex. And as a result of exchanges at this committee, we undertook to update that information monthly. So there have been 7 updates, and I would suggest to the committee that presenting that information on a monthly basis is an advance over the Minister and I appearing here in the 1st of November. This is the first time we've been back to talk about estimates requirements, but in the meantime, there have been updates on June 5th, July 9th, August 10th, September 11th, October 12th, and October 31st. And as the Minister said, it's a level of detail that is designed very much to inform parliamentarians and Canadians on the progress that departments are making.
Thank you for that. Minister, can you guarantee that all of the $7 billion that were approved are going to be allocated before this fiscal cycle ends and before we see the next main estimates? Yes or no question. Can you guarantee that all of these $7 billion will be spent before the next main estimates?
Thank you, Mr. MacGregor.
If the Minister could answer, would that be okay?
Brian's input on this in terms of that.
Estimates provide up to amount authority. So with this vote, we have the ability to allocate up to $7 billion if departments come forward with their submissions. At this time, we are approaching halfway in terms of allocations of that vote, and we will continue to update parliamentarians monthly, Canadians monthly, on our progress. Anything that is not allocated means that the department did not come forward with a TB submission, and it could be because they are involved in contract negotiations, developing the parameters of the program with their partners. If it is not accessed through the estimates this year, and this was a commitment that we made back in the spring, it reverts to the fiscal framework, and the Department of Finance will reprofile that money into a future year, and it will be drawn down in subsequent estimates exercises. Anything that is not accessed this year and that we know won't be accessed, we will highlight that to Parliament in our final subs of the year. Those amounts will be frozen. They won't be available for allocation. They'll be drawn down in future years, and we will tag those in future estimates documents as a Budget 18 commitment.
Thank you very much. Mr. MacGregor, 7 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair. Mr. Pagan, I too want to revisit Vote 40. Now, I understand, going through the different departments that I'm correct in saying that this is just the monies that have been allocated, not necessarily spent.
Correct.
Okay. So I again want to revisit this issue of parliamentary oversight, because one of the most important roles we have is that Her Majesty cannot spend any funds that Parliament does not first approve. Now, I appreciate that, the Government of Canada is listing these items. The problem I have is that Vote 40 has already been approved by Parliament. $7 billion was approved, and so even as we see these items come up, our ability to talk about where the money is actually going is kind of a moot point, because the funds have already been approved. And so I go through the list and I see there's $9.5 million allocated for aquaculture growth. Well, on the West Coast we have huge problems with fish farms and their impact on wild salmon. There's $10 million allocated for rural broadband. You know how big this country is $10 million even enough to cover that? At the Agriculture Committee, we're hearing a lot that this is necessary. So again, my ability to influence or have any say in the oversight of this spending is limited because the funds have already been approved. There's $22 million going to protect the southern resident killer whale. Again, an issue that my constituents have great concern over. My ability to oversee these funds, they have already been approved by Parliament. Do you see where my particular problem is here? Because the money's been already approved, but at that time, we'd had no idea where it was being allocated. So that's the issue I have, and I'm just wondering if you can comment on that.
Right. Mr. MacGregor, this is a tremendously important issue, and there was a great deal of debate within this committee and elsewhere in the spring. I don't know that a short answer will do it justice, but the starting point is about improving transparency so that parliamentarians understand how the estimates process supports the budget. And in the Minister's own parlance, we had it completely backwards before. When we submitted the estimates, then we followed up with a budget, and then we brought budget items piece at a time over many years, in some cases 5-6 years from a budget announcement until the time it showed up in the estimates. The intention of Vote 40 this year was to essentially serve as a report card. The government has said in Budget 18 that they expect to spend $7 billion on a cash basis, and so we have put that in the estimates, and we are reporting every month about how that money is being allocated and how it's being used. And at the end of the year, we will see how the government has done in terms of allocating money to its priorities as announced in Budget 18. I think that that's a tremendous step forward in terms of transparency and just making the process understandable. Parliament approved the budget, and therefore I don't think it's illogical that Parliament would approve the appropriations to implement the budget. And what we are doing through our reporting is providing a level of detail and a pace of detail that has simply never existed before, and we're supporting that with additional online material, including on InfoBase.
So my next question then is, at the time of Vote 40, were departmental plans detailed enough to indicate they had a future need for these funds, or are departmental plans now coming into greater clarity now that they know the funding is available?
That's a terrific question, and the short answer is that no. When the estimates were tabled, when the budget was tabled, departmental plans did not reflect the priorities announced and the funding made available in Budget 18. And that.
So do you see the problem there? Because if departments realize that there is a rather large sum of money available, perhaps they can start finding reasons for that money which they may otherwise have had to justify in the first place.
Just to be very clear, the budget process is not based on the Department of Finance just doling money out willy-nilly. Yeah. This is based on expressed needs by departments. A minister has written to the Minister of Finance requesting a certain sum of money to do a certain program or fulfill a certain mandate commitment, and that is scrutinized very vigorously by the Department of Finance to make sure that funding is in fact required and is going to serve the government's objectives. And so departments are not surprised to get budget money. They've asked for it, and they know in some level of detail what they'll be doing with it. It does take time to go from finding out that you got money in the budget to actually working with your program partners and negotiating contracts to be able to present detailed terms and conditions, and that explains in part why we're at 45% allocated.
Thank you. I want to change topics now and address Phoenix. So the Auditor General is still not terribly happy with how this program is being dealt with. We know that, since the implementation of this pay system, more than $1 billion has been spent trying to fix it. I'm just wondering, from Treasury Board's perspective, I have a lot of constituents who are affected by this, whose lives have been placed on hold, going through tremendous strain. How much farther down the rabbit hole do we have to go before we actually see this problem fixed? I mean, how much longer are we going to have to wait? And you estimate how much more money is going to be spent to fix it?
Yeah. Karen may have some detail on that, but Mr. MacGregor, there are some elements to your question that are well beyond my remit in the expenditure management sector. You mentioned the money's already spent. The Comptroller General did a report in late spring that suggested an amount going forward, and to my knowledge that remains the best number out there in terms of the cost of fixing Phoenix. Beyond that, the timing and where PSPC is at with system upgrades, I think those are questions.
The department provided some advice as to their best estimates. I mean, is that not a topic of discussion at the upper levels of Treasury Board about how much longer this could go on for?
I'm not part of those discussions.
Nora, I'm sorry.
Thank you so much. Mr. MacGregor, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister, for indulging me. So neither the main estimates nor the supplementary estimates include the $4.5 billion purchase of the Trans Mountain Pipeline. Your government took a loan through the Canada Development Investment Corporation from Export Development Canada to create a new Crown Corporation, Trans Mountain Corporation. So we've heard all about this talk of parliamentary oversight. Why would you make such a large purchase and not use the estimates process to get this money approved? And if you have so much money floating around from Crown corporations, why on earth is your government spending it on a diluted bitumen exporting pipeline and not addressing the needs of the housing crisis or climate change adaptation and mitigation?
Well, Mr. MacGregor, diversifying our markets for our energy is critically important.
States currently. It all goes to the United States currently, so you can't use that argument.
Diversifying our energy exports is critically important. 97% of our energy goes to the United States
through the existing pipeline
right now, and finding new markets for Canadian energy is important. Right now, we are selling our Canadian energy at a deep discount as a result of not having the ability.
Why was this purchase not made through the estimates process?
Well, it's actually it's a non-budgetary item. Brian can expand on that, but I can tell you that we believe it's in our national interest to complete the TMX project, because we need to expand our markets for our energy. Right now, Canadian energy is being sold at a deep discount.
I understand
as a result of not having those markets. That is good for all Canadians.
Thank you, Minister.
That is good for not just people in the energy sector.
Will you be able to find $4.5 billion for other Crown corporations like the CMHC
the deep discount that we're selling Canadian energy at?
Colleagues, as I mentioned once before,
$15 billion.
I'd like to be able to hear both the question and the answer.
It costs our economy $15 billion per year.
Thank you, Minister. I think Minister Brison said that Mr. Pagan could expand upon the answer directly to your question about the subs.
I would like to get one more question to the Minister. I don't want to hear any more on this line of questions. Yeah, I realize that. So, Minister, I've heard all of your reasoning. Will your government commit to finding $4.5 billion for other Crown corporations like the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation to spend on housing immediately if you can do the same for a pipeline?
Actually, we're making unprecedented investments
right now,
in housing as a government. In fact, our national housing strategy, affordable housing strategy,
backloaded in 2020.
Is very significant in partnership.
Not addressing
the federal government is clearly back. But Brian, on the item of the non-budgetary item of Trans Mountain.
Well, thank you for the question, Mr. MacGregor. In the estimates documents at the front end, you'll see that we break out spending by budgetary voted and statutory, and non-budgetary voted and statutory. Non-budgetary items are those items that go to the bottom line of the Government of Canada. They affect the underlying composition of our assets. So loans, recoveries, investments and advances. And so in this case, there is no appropriation authority. We don't need the cash to make this purchase. It is a loan from one Crown corporation to another Crown corporation. It's recorded on the books of the Government of Canada as an asset with an offsetting liability for the amount of that loan. And then when it is sold, we will either make money or lose money on that transaction, and that will be recorded in the underlying statements of the Government of Canada.
Thank you very much.